There's a quote widely misattributed to Orleans Parish District Attorney Jim Garrison, and actually from 1842 from Alfred Lord Tennyson in Morte d'Arthur, that authority forgets a dying king. Now, in that instance, when Tennyson wrote that, what he was speaking about was the erosion of time and how that saps groups of their power, in this instance, generation that is slowly fading. And that sapping of power and that fading of memory becomes something that can assuage guilt. Normally I'm funny. Tonight I'm not going to be funny. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. You should have tipped your waitress. When our daughter was in 6th grade, she had to do a research project. She was 12 years old at the time. And she began this one night by simply asking me, she was sitting on the couch, if my father had won a Purple Heart when he was in Vietnam. And I said no. Fortunately, he was not wounded while he was there, and we're all very blessed for that. And then she came back a little bit later, maybe an hour, and said, but wasn't he given cancer by Agent Orange? And I said, yes, he was. The Army actually sent him a letter to that effect. And she said, what's the difference? And I said to her at that moment, and I still believe it today, some 8 years later, that's a good goddamn question. It truly is. So my father, who's here tonight, is a Vietnam veteran. Okay, he was a draftee. Now, draftees were the people who did not claim to have chronic injuries as a result of having to carry their daddy's money. And while those pieces of shit were in Manhattan seeing their stock portfolios earn money because Dow and Monsanto stocks consistently went up during the war, their community, parents' blue-collar community, was slaughtered by that war. To a point where not far from where they grew up, there's actually a mini Arlington cemetery to reflect the number of losses that they had in their community. Some in combat, and of course some after combat. My father, as you can surmise, is also a cancer survivor. Some years ago, he got a letter from the Army, which pays a certain amount of money per month with no acceptance of responsibility, but simply to say that we acknowledge that it's possible that the choices we made in the 1960s resulted in your cancer, and we believe this amount of money will make you fuck off and shut up, which is a reflection of the number of lawsuits that were filed against our government, our military, Dow, and Monsanto over the years. Now, in a culture where we historically have done a very poor job of honoring veterans, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War to today, that is something, and it should not be dismissed. But it is also, as I step up on my soapbox here, because I took this theme very, very seriously, a way of copping out to the actual decisions and responsibility. And again, I'm just paying absolutely no respect to the rules of storytelling because I have to keep my notes in, because I have specifics. Normally, not tonight, but normally, my father wears his 1st Cavalry hat, which is a division within the Army, and he wears on it his combat infantry badge, which, and this is a quote, so that's why I have my note papers here, recognizes the inherent sacrifices of all infantrymen and that they face a greater risk of being wounded or killed in action than any other military occupational specialties. His division, and you have actually heard of the 1st Cavalry, is most well-known societally from a movie called We Were Soldiers, based on a book called We Were Soldiers Once and Young. There is about a battle that took place roughly a year before my father was there. They used helicopters in the place of horses, and they adorned those helicopters with a slogan that said, "Death from above," which becomes relevant later. My daughter asked how the disabilities payments worked. And I said, well, many veterans have earned disability payments, and many for non-combat injuries. That is a thing. And then I explained to her that money is a dirty thing, and it's what we use to create what are called thought-terminating actions. Well, I've done this, so I don't need to think about this anymore. I don't need to think about you anymore. I don't need to recognize who you are as a person and a family and a human being anymore. And when you're talking to a 12-year-old who's just introduced to money, and that probably wasn't the best way I could have handled it. That was definitely a way I handled it. Now, before I continue here, I want to be very clear that at no point ever in my life did my father advocate that he or other Vietnam veterans poisoned by Agent Orange should be awarded Purple Hearts. It's never a conversation we've had. It was a position my daughter at 12 years old took after researching the topic, and it was one that I passionately agreed with and assisted her in writing letters to people, and that is still something I feel very strongly about some 8 years later. So, just so we all understand that. And again, breaking all the rules. All the rules broken. So the commentary she had from her teacher was an interesting one, basically saying that the topic was almost too big for the project itself. And I interpreted that for her to mean that you could take it one of two ways, which is that this is too dense for a 12-year-old, and what the hell would a 12-year-old know? And the other possible interpretation of that, number two, would be that maybe it's so obvious that even a 12-year-old could grasp the problem here. And I think you can all guess which of those two camps I landed. So, I want to explain to you the criteria for a Purple Heart in the United States of America, which is really over-explaining because no other country awards a Purple Heart. So you can put away the United States Army, where the only people to go. So that is a award given at the behest of the President of the United States, and it includes a number of criteria, most of which aren't relevant to the use of a toxin. And those criteria are, of course, if we are at war in another country, if another country attacks us, if we are en route somewhere and are attacked, if there is a terrorist attack, if we are part of a peacekeeping force, as has been known to happen over the last 40 years. And then, this actual written criteria from our government clearly denotes those things that do not warrant a Purple Heart. And those include chemical, biological, or nuclear attacks not released by the enemy. And that is, I'm a career negotiator, that's what I do for a living. That is what we call a thought-terminating cliche. It allows someone to stop thinking about this topic at all and simply say, well, the criteria say this. Now, I would put to you that most of that criteria, which were written by Douglas MacArthur in 1932 and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1942, never imagined a possibility where we would drop fucking chemicals on our own soldiers. And as I shared with my daughter, as I was hoping to write her paper, one should never let their inability to imagine the worst impair them from doing their best. And I'm really proud of that. That sounds like a quote from somebody who's doing more than sitting at Clare and Downs on a Saturday night, I gotta be honest. But where I urged her to review her paper was in the language, the clearly was not attacked. And then my daughter, who was in the advanced reading class, I'm gonna be very fair and honest with you, posed this question within her paper, where it described the requirement of a Purple Heart being engaging in enemy action, to which she said, for what other purpose had my grandfather crossed the Pacific but to be in action with the enemy? To me, and I'll admit I'm a homer, it's my kid, well, that's it, that's a slam dunk. Now I'll share with you that the various elected and appointed legislators she wrote to strongly disagreed with her position. And one of them went so far as to even explain that no, action means a specific engagement. That is a letter she received from an elected official in this country at 12 years old. And that I helped her counter with, we award soldiers who are shelled and bombed when otherwise not engaged. I said, and at that moment, you are simply in theater, or put another way, you are at war. And that should count. Now, one final piece of that criteria makes it very clear, at the behest of the Secretary of the Army, that we will treat anyone killed or wounded by friendly fire in action as a result of an act of the enemy of the United States. Seems simple. The layperson would say this slam dunk. Agent Orange was friendly fire, case closed. And if that case were closed, I would be standing on a different soapbox in front of you tonight. Because friendly fire has a funny word in it called ordinance, which is something that we had to explain to our 12-year-old daughter what that meant. And Agent Orange was, for those of you who are familiar with it, what's called a herbicide. It was meant to defoliate an area. And our daughter banged her head up against a wall in this project. Like, well, what do I do from here? Fortunately, we have access to the Google. And I pointed her to a fantastic 5-part series from the Chicago Tribune about Agent Orange, which included 2 very key points. One, that in 1965, Dow and Monsanto produced memorandum as they produced Agent Orange that described it as one of the most dangerous toxins in the world. And I want to frame that comment for you very quickly. At this point in time in the 1960s, you had smallpox, anthrax, mustard gas. These things existed. And yet the creators of Agent Orange considered what they made the most dangerous toxin on the planet. And then that memorandum went, this is Googleable, to the Air Force's development lab, where they made the determination, our Air Force, that the military version of Agent Orange was even more toxic because it was produced quickly and with fewer safeguards. And that was okay, literally, because it was going to be used against the enemy. To which I explained to our daughter that in this mind and this heart and on this goddamn soapbox, that counts as ordinance. You knew you were going to use that to attack the enemy. And then she, who's had a couple good one-liners over the years, added to her paper, "Death from above indeed." So we knew it was dangerous, we knew it would harm the enemy, and unfortunately that still runs afoul of the idea that chemical, biological, and nuclear agents do not count when reviewing our people. And that's where the conversation ended. Now, these veterans, they have their disability payments, and that is something, as I said earlier. But lest we forget, the legislators she wrote to, the appointees, the service branches she wrote to, those all work for us as a citizenry of this country. I know that's kind of an unpopular, or at least unacknowledged point in this very bizarre timeline that we seem to be living in. But we call the shots on these things. And that we need to award those citizen soldiers not only for the wounds inflicted upon them at that time, but the 50+ years of suffering that they've endured after the fact. She said soapbox. I took it seriously. And it is rather amazing, as I helped our daughter write, that many congressional terms won by young, holster-sniffing, veteran coattail-riding pieces of shit will not take up this cause. Only one of them ever has, to create a separate award called an Orange Heart. It was a real thing that was fortunately and soundly defeated by our Congress. And these people face something today where, some 50 years later, the enemy is not the Viet Cong that they faced. There were 2.7 million soldiers in Vietnam. Today there are less than 630 alive, some 23%. And their enemy is time. They have endured this, and their families, for incalculable time. And with every test they wait for, with every doctor visit, the fine print says, "We did this to you." Our country and our government did this to you. So now, you'll excuse me, time runs out, and there is so little time to do right by these people. Which brought me back to the quote we had started with as I spoke to her. We must not forget our dying kings.